going over a little bit of House Bill 1859, which passed in 2022. Oh, thanks, Tierney, for starting the recording. Sorry about that. I didn't give you a heads up on that. And again, here's our rules inbox if you have any questions. Just to go over some information, housekeeping for today's meeting. These sessions will be recorded. You probably can see in the chat that our administrative person, Tierney, has started the recording. So because they are being recorded, the recording is subject to public disclosure. And we're recording these sessions just so that we can make sure that we get everybody's comments down in the record. And we will post the recordings on our rules webpage later this week. While the team chat feature will be on, any written questions submitted in chat are also being saved in the rulemaking file, and as such is subject to public disclosure. Questions and comments in chat today probably won't be able to respond to in real time, but we will be, I'll be looking back at the chat at the end of the session and hopefully can address issues that come up at that time. Participants, you are all muted, and we will unmute you when we can enable your microphone. If you have questions or want to provide comments during the session, please just use your raise hand function and we will unmute you. And if you would like to submit questions, again, there's our rules inbox. So for today, the background, rulemaking is being proposed to implement legislation concerning the transfer of responsibility and authority for cannabis testing laboratory quality standards and accreditation from LCB to the Washington State Department of Ag. 3 bills are related to this transfer. So just as a little bit of background, I'm assuming many of you know this, but if not, House Bill 2052, which passed in 2019, House Bill 1859, and then last year, House Bill 21, second substitute, House Bill 2151. And so 1859, which passed in 2022, this was agency request legislation by LCB and Ag. It created our now CLASP group. It reassigned the responsibility for developing cannabis testing lab quality standards from LCB to Washington State Department of Agriculture, directs agriculture to establish lab standards in rule and specify cannabis labs must adhere to Department of Ag lab quality standards. And it clarifies cannabis labs must obtain and maintain accreditation. And so the bill that passed last year, second substitute House Bill 2151, reassigned the transfer of authority for cannabis testing lab accreditation from the Department of Ecology to the Department of Agriculture using expedited rulemaking. The bill, House Bill 2052, which passed in 2019, originally had transferred the authority from LCB to Ecology. 2151 also authorized the Department of Agriculture to collect fees to support costs and also directs agriculture and our interagency coordination team to act cooperatively to ensure effective implementation and administration. Let's see. So just wanted to tee up the scope of our conversation today. So the scope for the rulemaking and our conversation is to implement 2151 and 1859, removing lab accreditation and lab quality standards language and referencing Department of Agriculture new rules that they have in place. The rulemaking also looks to align terms in our rules with terms used in Department of Agriculture's new WACs around lab quality standards and lab accreditation. We have our rulemaking includes some clarifications around certification requirements. It requires labs to notify LCB of any changes in their accreditation with Department of Agriculture. We look to remove some quality assurance standards tables that are in currently 314.55.109 WAC, and just to simply reference those same standards in 314.55.102. And you'll notice some changes where we're replacing WS LCB with LCB, and that's ongoing changes that we have kind of clean up in our rules. So you'll see that in a couple of places. We did also want to mention today that we're not planning on talking about other open rulemaking. If you're following cannabis rulemaking at LCB, you know there's a lot going on. So if questions come up around rulemaking outside of the topic for today, like cannabis waste or samples or minors on non-retail premises, we'll be happy to answer those questions, but you can email us or put it in the chat if you have questions about that, and we can get back to you at another time. We're also not planning on talking about other WAC sections related to specifically lab certification and lab quality standards and lab accreditation. We're not planning on talking about proposed legislation that's currently being discussed at the legislature. And also, this isn't really the time for us to be talking about, if you have any questions specific to AG's rules, that might be another topic that we won't really entertain today. Questions about compliance with current lab reporting requirements or questions about current CCRS requirements also. If you have questions about that, happy to record them and get back to you about those questions at another time. So responding to questions, our main goal today is to hear your feedback. For other questions that come up, as I mentioned, we'll be happy to get back to you after today's session. And there's our email again. In case you forgot it, there it is again. So just to give an overview of the project timeline, as you know, just thought I'd point out here, House Bill 1859 and also Second Substitute House Bill 2151 both took effect last year. And those resulted in Department of Ag's new rules around lab quality standards and accreditation that I have listed here. July 17th of last year, we filed our CR 101, officially beginning rulemaking around this implementation. And here is the file WISR number there. Again, and we will post this PowerPoint on our website, and all these links will be active for you to get to. And so here we are, our first stakeholder session. And we also have another one on Thursday. And so tentatively, what we're looking at is filing a CR 102 with the proposed rules at the end of February. And then if we do that, if that works out, we don't have too many changes, then that would lead us to the public feedback period on the draft rules with a public hearing on April 9th. That we could move on from that to a May 10th CR 103 filing, and then the rules would be effective on June 10th. Nick, do you have a question? I can entertain a question now. Should I unmute them, Tierney, or can you unmute?
I
Looks like I'm unmuted.
Okay.
All right, cool. Hey, thank you for having us here today. I'm looking at this timeline. There's a big gap there between July and February. And what happened in the interim is there's a bill moving now, 1347. And you said, we're not talking about legislation here. But if that bill were to pass, potentially it has impact on these rules. So is there any credence to the thought of considering the future timeline here? Looks like it's moving pretty quick, but would we potentially end up in a situation where we're opening this back up if 1347 passes? And should this timeline take a little bit longer so that we don't have to be back here again?
Thanks for that question. Like I said, I was hoping not to talk about the legislation, but I do have here a couple things. We do have tentative here on the timeline. So, we're keeping an eye on things all the way around. And then also, as we go through our discussion today, we can see if you have the same questions at the end of the PowerPoint. So I understand what some of the issues are related to 1347, and some of our presentation today might address some of those. Justin, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can just clarify on that last question. So as far as the timeline here is concerned, legislative session, sine die, is on April 27th. And so the public hearing for these particular rules is on April 9th. And we're tentatively scheduled for a May 10th CR 103. And so we will know before the filing of the CR 103 if there's any legislation that would impact this. And so if the legislation does not pass, we'll still be able to continue. And if it passes and there's some sort of an implication here, then we would likely just do a supplemental CR 102 to address whatever is needed to be addressed by that legislation. So hopefully that helps, and it shouldn't impact the timeline.
Okay, thanks very much. That's good. Let's moving on here. So for today, we're talking about changes to 6 WAC sections: 314.55.0995, 314.55.102, 314.55.1035, and 314.55.109. We're proposing to amend those 4 sections, and those were included in the draft rules that we posted on our website. We are proposing to repeal two sections, 314.55.1025 and 314.55.103. We did not include that in the draft rules that we posted. We probably would have been good to include that in there, but just wanted to let you know that's the current plan. So I'm going to kind of go over an overview of changes for the 4 sections, and then we'll go through specific draft language. So for WAC 314.55.0995, we're removing the term accreditation in our rules. We're referencing Department of Ag's rule chapters 16.310 and 16.309 related to lab standards and accreditation. We're clarifying conditions for laboratory certification, including maintaining a couple elements from 314.55.103, specifying some requirements and timelines, and adding a notification requirement, and some housekeeping again, changing WS LCB to LCB. For 314.55.102, we're removing the accreditation term and pointing to Department of Ag rules. We're aligning some of our terms with ag rules also. We're aligning subcontracting of parameters with Department of Ag rules, and we're aligning some reporting to some CCRS format requirements. We're clarifying some requirements, and we're also adding reference to DOH's rules, Chapter 24670. For WAC 314.55.1035, we're clarifying some language. We're removing reference to the two sections that we're proposing to repeal, 314.55.103 and 1025. We're adding notification requirements for changes in accreditation. We're removing certification fees language, and we're removing reference to proficiency testing requirements. For 314.55.109, we're replacing accredited with certified for testing requirements. We're removing quality assurance testing tables, and we're referencing the tables in 314.55.102, which contain essentially the same limits, and also addresses some differences in units per metals in the two sections. And we're aligning terms with Department of Agriculture rules. So let's get into the rule language. And as we go along here, this is, hopefully you can see that. If I use, maybe I can make it larger here. But then I just have a hard time on my two screens. So if people can't see this, we can, maybe here we are. I can make it a little larger. So this is just going through the rule language. And as we move along here, raise your hand if there's some issues you want to talk about. We're changing, so we took out ag and their vendor as meeting the LCBs. So third-party laboratory must be certified by LCB and meet Department of Agriculture accreditation requirements under their Chapter 16.310 WAC. That's their accreditation rule prior to conducting quality assurance tests required under this chapter. We did include, just to specify more clearly, licensed producers and processors may not have a financial interest in a certified laboratory, which is just spelling that out more clearly. And then we have just some cleanup here, lab to laboratory, and then removing the WS LCB and replacing it with LCB. Moving along, this again is in 0995. Each lab must employ a scientific director. We're maintaining that. However, we are the remainder of requirements for the scientific director and is just pointing to Department of Ag rules right now. So each lab must employ a scientific director responsible to ensure the achievement and maintenance of quality standards. The scientific director must possess the minimum qualifications, and then pointing to agriculture's rules 16.309. For this section, certified labs must follow the analytical requirements, and pointing to Department of Agriculture's rules for lab quality standards. For this one, we used some information, we retained some information that was in 103 that we're looking to repeal, and then also just clarifying some certification requirements. Certified labs must be accredited by ag under their regulations. A laboratory must provide the following: their most recent audit report issued to them by Department of Agriculture, the scope of accreditation, listing the accredited parameters, proof of current accreditation with Department of Agriculture, and then also just their contact information including email, phone number, physical, and mailing addresses. We clarified that LCB will provide a certification letter to laboratories indicating whether their certification is approved or denied, and that letters that issue certification approval will include approved fields of testing, requirements for maintaining certification, and the date of the expiration for certification. Nick, I see you have a question. Tierney, would you be able to unmute him? Or maybe I can unmute him.
Looks like I got it.
Okay.
Thank you again. So I'm looking at subsection 3E here, and especially this first sentence that LCB will provide a certification letter to laboratories letting them know if they're approved or denied. So at this point in the text, we're talking about certification being granted. And the criteria for that certification letter being granted is listed above in subsections 3A through 3D. And these are all administrative steps that the lab has to take. They've got to have a scientific director, pursuant, same as the ag requires. They have to follow laboratory protocols as defined by ag. They have to be accredited by ag. And then they have to provide these 4 pieces of documentation showing that they've completed those things. And so the language here that, LCB will let the lab know if their certification is approved or denied, I'd kind of like to see that amended to reflect what I think the reality is here, that the LCB will provide a certification letter if the above criteria are met, full stop. Recognizing that later in this section, you talk about laboratories committing fraud. And then again, it's talked about in 1035. And I appreciate that because it's happened more than once that labs have been shut down for fraudulent activities. And so that's important, but really that is an action related to revocation or suspension. And in this subsection 3E, we're just talking about granting. And the criteria for granting a certification is just that they're following WSDA accreditation requirements and have provided the pursuant documentation. So I'd like that first sentence to not say, it just feels like they may or may not approve it. They may or may not deny it, when really I think what we're saying here is if you've checked all these boxes in 3A through 3D, the certification will be granted. Possibly you want to add something that says unless the lab has been suspended or revoked, then won't be granted. But there's no criteria outside of 3A through 3D that would cause denial.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Okay, so I think we'll move on. So section 3F through G in 0995, lab certification. LCB certification of a laboratory is valid for 1 year. Just being explicit about that, labs must apply for certification renewal each year to maintain their certification. Laboratories applying for renewal of certification must submit required documentation at least 30 days prior to their expiration date. And LCB must allow, certified labs must allow the LCB to conduct physical visits. Continuing on in section 3H, certified labs must report all test results directly into LCB's traceability system within 24 hours of completion. This was specified in the 103 checklist, and so it was just pulled in here to be explicit. And I see we have a question from Jay. Tierney, do you think you could unmute him?
Yep. Jay, you're able to unmute.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so I have a question or a statement or something, comment, I guess, is the word I'm looking for, about section G that we just went over.
Yeah, here, let me go back.
Yeah, regarding the LCB to conduct physical visits and inspect laboratory and equipment testing and related records. This also seems to be a function to me that WSDA has taken over, as far as, I mean, because this is basically looking at, laboratory activities and data. This is sort of like audit kind of questions. So I feel like the LCB's responsibility to kind of look at the testing, like, what methods and things like that, are more SDA now.
Okay, thank you. I'm just writing it down. Okay. Great, thank you. Move. Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
Hey, Denise, I just wanted to bring your attention. There's a comment that Mr. Foster put in the chat a few minutes ago. I think it was about related to an earlier subsection, but I just wanted to flag it. It asked, can a retailer have a financial interest in a lab?
Oh, thank you. Okay, I didn't see that, sorry. Did you want to answer that, Daniel, or should we just?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yeah, I think the rule language doesn't specifically address that, but I think if there's an interest in adding that, if the concern is sort of the same about a conflict of interest, I think we can explore that, but yeah, I don't know. I would also like to, yeah, I would see what other folks have to think about it, if there's equal concerns about retailer conflict of interest versus producers and processors.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that question. Sorry, I missed that in the chat. Thanks, Daniel, too. I'm sorry, I thought you were leading up for me to answer that, so I wasn't totally sure. Okay, so we've gone through here, and we've gotten comments on that. Thank you again. Any comments you put in the chat too, we're also keeping track of. If I don't get to it now, it's something that we will look at. And we're finishing this up, that laboratories must record in the traceability system an acknowledgement of the receipt of samples. And then also that samples are destroyed in compliance with our cannabis waste section.
Hey, Denise, can we pause real quick? Nick has another question, and Nick, you're able to unmute.
Go ahead. Thanks.
Awesome.
Danny.
Thank you. Yes, I'm here on subsection. I think we're in 3H. And the first sentence, certified laboratories will report all test results directly to LCB's traceability system within 24 hours. There is another time this is mentioned in 1022B. And in 1022B, it says that the laboratory must report all quality control test results directly into LCB's traceability system. And I think this language here should reflect what is said in 1022B, all quality control test results, distinguishing that there are also voluntary, non-mandatory R&D, whatever you want to call it, test results that do not belong in the traceability system.
Okay, thank you for that comment. And thank you for mentioning that. And so moving on, unless we had any other comments on that section, 0995, a certified lab must notify the LCB of any change or potential change in their WSDA accreditation status within 48 hours of the change or notice of a potential change. This includes any notices received from WSDA which identify a potential change to accreditation status, including but not limited to notices to correct, notices of intent, or other administrative notices of potential action for any or all accredited testing parameters. And the board may suspend a laboratory certification if the WSDA revokes or suspends the laboratory's accreditation under Chapter 16310 WAC, or if the laboratory conducts testing under this chapter outside of their approved scope of accreditation. Okay, and I see that TJ put in some information in the chat related to financial interest. Laboratory must identify potential conflicts of interest. And Nick, I see that your hand is up, and Tierney, do you mind unmuting Nick?
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Looking at what you currently have on the page, this is subsection 3I. Seems like LCB is asking the labs to provide their correspondences with the WSDA, and these correspondences are pursuant to their accreditation with WSDA. And I'm kind of just questioning the why for this subsection. The requirement here is that the labs provide this information to LCB, but there's nothing written that suggests that LCB would take any action regarding the substance of those documents, simply that LCB wants them. And to me, that feels like just sort of it's extra work and extra exposure for the laboratory, when really to check this box in 3I, we just have to give it to the LCB, but not that the LCB can or will do anything about it. And so it really feels like subsection 3I here, this is really in WSDA's lane, and it feels duplicative to me that we would be handing over our correspondences. Additionally, LCB is a member of the CLASP team, and so if LCB has reason to need access to this information, I think they have an avenue where they can get it already without asking for us to be sort of a middleman in providing it. So I think this should be taken out. And actually, sorry, while I still have the mic, I feel the same way about subsection 3DI. So 3DI is also asking for our audit report. When, yeah, you see it's you had it there. Yeah. 3DI, our most recent audit report, but why do you need that when in 3II you have proof of our current accreditation? So again, it's duplicative.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your comment on that, those two issues. So moving on, we're still in 0995. We added reference to the laboratory that the LCB will take immediate disciplinary action against any certified laboratory that fails to comply with the provisions of this chapter, 314.55 WAC, or chapter 316.309 WAC, which is Department of Agriculture rules, or falsifies records related to this section, or chapter 309, 16309 WAC, including without limitation revoking the certification of the certified laboratory. And Tierney, would you mind unmuting Jay for us, who has his hand up?
I'm going to be taking over for Tierney here for the next few minutes. Let me go do that.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
then Jay, you should be able to unmute.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I just had a comment sort of go, well, I guess it relates to this section 4 as well, but also kind of back to the J right before it, not this J, the J on the paper. Oh, sorry. But but both these sections are talking about suspending and revoking certification, and it kind of relates to a later section too. There's no opportunity for the labs to have a time to appeal any of these decisions. I know we're not talking about ag, but there's not really a clear appeal method in the ag world either. And so anyway, I know I said it relates to a later section as well. I think that 103.5, I believe, if I'm right. But I think there needs to be some time to appeal, because the way language is written now, it's like an instantaneous suspension without the labs having any opportunity to voice their concerns that maybe something wasn't done correctly. So anyway, I'm just going to say that now. It's probably going to come up again later.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And Daniel, can you unmute Nick?
Nick, you should be unmuted.
Right. Thank you. I'm actually on the prior slide in H.
Let's go back.
No, H, sorry, I'm in J. My bad. It's the next one. Yeah, so in J, the board may suspend a laboratory certification if the WSDA revokes or suspends a laboratory's accreditation. I think the word may should be switched to will here. The LCB will suspend a laboratory certification if the WSDA does similar to the accreditation. I can't imagine a scenario where a lab is not accredited by the WSDA but still certified by the LCB. And possibly we'll talk later about appeals. I thought section 103.5 does talk about appeals process. And also my understanding is that if it's related to fraud, immediate suspension would be consistent with prior activities, prior LCB administrative actions.
Okay, thank you. We're finishing up here, and okay, so now we're going into 314.55.102. This part is just some cleanup, removing accreditation, and then also we had an incorrect reference. This is the Washington. This is the Department of Ag's accreditation rules, so we're just clarifying that. We made some changes just to align terminology. Instead of using the word screening throughout, we're using testing, which is terminology used with Department of Ag's rules. Oh, and I see Daniel put in the chat too. Thanks, Daniel. In section 103.5.4, a laboratory has its certification suspended or revoked under this section may request an administrative hearing to contest the suspension or revocation. So that's where that appears in 103.5. So the terminology we changed to align with Department of Ag rules, and then moving on to 1B and C, again, aligning with Department of Ag rules and referencing their rules. Yes, thank you for the additional comments in the chat. And then certified labs may reference for samples, samples for testing by subcontracting for fields of testing to other laboratories certified by LCB. We previously had in that labs could only reference out samples for mycotoxin, heavy metal, or pesticide testing. And to be consistent with Department of Ag rules, those restrictions have been removed. In 102, Section 2F and 3, general product quality control testing requirements for certified labs. This is to align with some recent format changes for CCRS reporting and quality control analysis. Again, we're removing screening using testing and are only required for samples that have not been previously tested or that have been authorized by LCB for retesting. So that's just to clarify that issue there. Again, aligning terminology. This is just pretty straightforward, replacing screening with testing. We do have, we are removing this column from the residual solvent table to align with CCRS reporting format. And just maintaining units of micrograms per gram here. This part is referencing some additional clarification, removed mycotoxin, heavy metal, and pesticides. And then also just clarifying laboratories may not reference samples for conducting retesting of samples for fields of testing that they have already analyzed. So that can't be, labs can't send out samples to other labs to do testing on samples they've already tested. All test results, fields of testing that were subcontracted to other certified labs must be clearly indicated on the certificate of analysis, including the name and certification number of the laboratory that tested the sample. This just puts in a reference, just to clarify, we put in a reference for DOH's rules, a certificate of analysis issued by certified lab for any cannabis product subject to the requirements of this chapter and chapter 24670 WAC, just to cover all of the requirements from DOH to make sure that that's in there. Now we're moving on to section 1035. This is laboratory certification, suspension, and revocation. And we included, this was a bit of a confusing term, evidence. The certificate holder or owner made false statements in any material, including but not limited to, on the application, in submissions to the board, and regarding any testing performed or results provided to LCB. And let's see, I'm just looking at some of the chat. I see we have some good discussion in there about retailer requirements. So thanks for keeping that in the chat. Like I said, we'll keep a transcript of the chat information as well. And just clarifying, removing reference to 1025, not 102, 1025 and 103, and just referencing chapter 314.55 WAC. And just some additional cleanup. Again, as we previously discussed, the laboratory fails to notify the LCB of changes in accreditation with status as required under 0995. This includes failure to notify the LCB of any notices received from Department of Agriculture which identify potential for future change to accreditation. So that is included in this section also. We just removed, just some cleanup, removed accreditation and replaced it with, removed accredited, replaced with certified. Coming down the home stretch here. And now we're in section 109. And again, as I'd mentioned earlier, we are removing the tables that are in 109, which are essentially duplicated in 102, and then we are adding a reference to the 102 tables. This also kind of resolves an issue with a difference in units between the metals tables in 109 and 102. And similar language is, I'm not showing all of them, but this was done for heavy metals, but also it's being done for residual solvents, microbiological testing, and mycotoxin testing, pointing to the 102 tables. And I see we have some questions. Daniel, would you mind unmuting Nick? I think he had his hand up first.
Awesome. Thank you again. I think I'm going to try to take us back to section 102.
102.
And I'm looking at 7B.
Okay. Here? This
7B. Perfect. Yes.
Yes.
All test results, certified laboratory. Oh yeah, in this one, I was just going to suggest that being clearly indicated on the certificate of analysis, the name, address, and certification number. That's currently what's in section 103. I believe it's currently in section 103, and you move this over.
Yes.
And so I would just add the address of the reference lab. I do have more if you want to hear.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so it's actually in the next subsection 8, which you don't currently have any edits proposed in. I can read it to you if you want, but it has to do with certified laboratories not being limited in the amount of usable cannabis or cannabis products that they have on their premises, so long as the laboratory has records proving that all cannabis and cannabis-infused products in the lab's possession are held only for the testing purposes described in this chapter. And I'd like to propose an amendment there at the end that all of the cannabis and cannabis-infused products that the lab has in their possession are held only for laboratory testing purposes, full stop. This gets back to what I mentioned before about R&D testing, non-mandatory testing. Over the years, this subsection 8 has resulted in sort of like inconsistent enforcement from LCB, because you get some folks at LCB interpreting this to say, well, R&D tests are not described in this chapter, and therefore the certified laboratory cannot have cannabis samples for R&D testing. So basically R&D testing is not allowed. And then you have other people at LCB saying, well, no, that's absurd. Why would we do that? And so it has led to inconsistencies in enforcement. And I suggest in subsection 8 of 102, the products in the certified lab's possession are held only for laboratory testing purposes, period. I have more if you want me to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, we still have quite a bit of time and we're getting near the end, so.
Yeah, I think we're almost
Please
there.
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so still in 102, but now I'm in subsection 11, which you also don't have any amendments to subsection 11, I don't believe. No, you do not. But I think subsection 11 should just be completely removed. My memory is that subsection 11 was added when pesticide testing was added, and it's about there was a transition period for products that had been tested prior but not sold yet, and they didn't have a pesticide test, and that was okay. And subsection 11 is just really outdated now. It had to do with the transition period that took place in 2022. So I think you should just get rid of subsection 11.
Okay, thank you.
And moving on to 1035, I'm going to direct attention to subsection 2. I think it's B Roman 1, which you don't have any proposed edits for. Oh, yeah, but there it is on the screen. Okay, so the laboratory fails to submit acceptable corrective action. This would be a reason for certification revocation, would be that the laboratory fails to submit an acceptable corrective action report in response to a deficiency report. This is an accreditation activity where the accreditor, WSDA, issues a corrective action report or a deficiency report, and the laboratory must provide acceptable corrective action. We provide that to the Department of Ag, and the Department of Ag makes the determination as to whether or not it's an acceptable corrective action. So this subsection 2, I'm not sure if it's A Roman I or B Roman I, but either way, that first paragraph there, I think needs to just completely go, because this is WSDA's lane and it's duplicative here. And I've only got a couple more. I don't know if you want me to keep hogging the microphone or I can step aside for someone else. I see Jay's got a hand.
Yeah, sure. If Jay, maybe we can come
I'll
back
step
to you,
aside
Nick,
for
if you
now
don't
and
mind.
raise my
Yeah,
hand. Yeah.
thank you. And Daniel, if you could unmute Jay.
Yeah, I just did. Go for it, Jay.
Okay, great. I'd just start off by saying that those changes that Nick just mentioned, I agree with those as well. But now we're in this section 1035, 3A is what I was talking about before, as far as the appeal process. And basically the wording right now is that a laboratory that has its certification suspended or revoked may request a hearing, right? So that sort of implies to me that the suspension has already occurred. And so now, the lab is shut down. A 10-day suspension in this environment is pretty close to a death sentence for a lab, I think. I mean, maybe come back. Not sure, but I think it needs to be clear that there's an appeal process, because even no matter what's happened before, like, the labs need to have a chance to counter any sort of accusations against them prior to any sort of punitive punishment being put on them. So I just like to see that language clear, that there's an appeal process prior to suspension or revocation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess we're going, Nick, we'll be back here. Daniel's gonna unmute you. Thank you, Daniel.
All right, appreciate it. So I'm now looking, I'm in 1035 where we're at subsection 2, I think it's B Roman 2. That the laboratory this is a cause of penalty, that we notified the LCB of changes in accreditation. So if we fail to do that, okay, I get it. Then the second sentence here in Roman 2 is that this includes failure to notify the LCB of any notices received from WSDA, which identify a potential for future change in accreditation. And again, this is sort of a comment I made already. I think the last sentence here in Roman 2 should be taken out. We don't need to be like sharing all of our WSDA correspondences with LCB, because LCB can already access that information through their collaboration with CLASP. And it's really, you're just asking that we notify that these documents exist, but LCB hasn't described any content of those documents that would cause disciplinary action, simply that they exist and have been provided, which kind of just begs the question of why it feels like busy work and duplicative of Department of Ag. And I have one, I think just one more comment.
Okay. Daniel, do you want to go, or do you want Nick to just finish his next comment?
I'll let Nick. I'm gonna say I'll let Nick finish his comment, but I did just want to follow up on that last part, but I'll let Nick finish his comment first.
Okay. My last comment pertains to I am actually a little bit, okay, so now I am in 2B. In 2B, yeah, it's just 2B, the penalties for violations. Is that what you're looking at? Maybe it's the previous. Oh no, you're in 1.
Yeah.
So that's 2A. And then I think it's the next one.
Yeah, then I go into 109.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because yeah, there are no amendments to 2B.
Mm-hmm.
So it talks about the penalties for violations in 2A. And first violation is a 10-day suspension. Second violation is a 3-year period is a 30-day suspension, and third violation in a 3-year period is revocation. And I may end up contradicting Jay a little bit here, maybe just because I have a different reading of it. But as I go through these rules, and I'm thinking about what the laboratory is required to do in order to achieve and maintain certification, I kind of see two things. One is, well, we have to be accredited by WSDA, and we have to provide documentation showing that we're accredited by WSDA. So that's number one. Number two, everything about revocation or suspension is fraud. It's all fraud. It's either you lied about your accreditation, or you lied to the LCB, or you committed fraud in your test results. I mean, that's the focus here. It's like, number one, you're accredited and you have shown documentation that you're accredited. And number two, you better not commit fraud. And with that in mind, I almost feel like the penalties are a little bit light. A 10-day suspension for committing fraud. If you do it twice in 3 years, then it's a 30-day suspension. So that gives a lot of rope for committing fraud. I feel like a 10-day suspension is a slap on the wrist for how much you could financially benefit from committing that fraud. So I think subsection 2B possibly should be revisited. Now that LCB is not an accreditor who would give you a 10-day suspension for like failing multiple PTs in a row, okay, that's something like 10 days, spend 10 days to get your stuff in order. But it's like, we're talking about fraud here. That's the only reason that LCB would revoke a certification is fraud. And I'm not sure 10 days is enough.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that comment about that. And I see we also have a comment in the chat from Keegan. Daniel, did you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'll also say, I think this might be one of the first times that we've heard folks in the regulated industry ask for stiffer penalties. So I'll just say that. And then the second thing is, I do just want to note that we have been working with Ag through the class program. And any documentation that we are asking for in rule is because for whatever reason, for a variety of different reasons, we're unable to get that documentation through other processes. So I would just say that from the LCB's perspective, it would be our preference to get that documentation directly from Ag. But that isn't how things turned out. And so I think I just wanted to add that just because that point's been brought up a couple of times. Why don't you just get it from Ag? And that was all I had.
Thanks, Daniel. Did you want to, if you're okay, unmuting Jay for us?
Hi, Denise. I'm taking over again. Jay, you're ready to unmute.
Okay, great. Thanks. Playing a little shuffle over there. Yeah, I just want to just kind of keep going down this appeal situation. I see this comment from Keegan on the thing about wouldn't it be dangerous if to allow a lab to continue, et cetera, et cetera. I think we can't make the assumption that WSDA or LCB or DOH or any state agency is perfect, right? We can't assume that the person that's doing the investigation is truly qualified, doesn't have some sort of hidden agenda. Who knows, right? Could be a misunderstanding. I think innocent until proven guilty still works, at least in this state, maybe. Try not to comment on the world today. But, I think that, it's just sort of the traditional way that things work in this country is that you get a chance to defend yourself against any claims prior. And I would also just, as a side, if you're really concerned about pesticides getting out, getting rid of that 50-pound batch and maybe having some chain of custody and real quality control sampling regulations would be more efficient at safeguarding the public.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. And then Tierney, would you mind unmuting Nick for us?
Nick, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think it's Daniel. Just responding there. I think two things. It's like, yeah, one, you should be able to get this stuff from WSDA. You got LCB is a member of class. We're of the interagency coordination team. That's the place where I think those types of documents should be shared. If you can't get them, I think that's a separate issue. But asking for labs to do more work and also to put ourselves at greater exposure by being the ones who share it, I don't think is appropriate. That's number one. Number two, there isn't anything in these rules, in this draft, that suggests that LCB having access to that information would at all be actionable. Nothing here contemplates that WSDA would get a corrective action report from WSDA or from the labs directly and then take any action on it based on its content. The only requirement here that's contemplated is that the lab turn it over, but not that anything within its contents would be actionable. And so it begs the question of why.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I see we have also a comment related to that. I'm just going to move on down here for the rule. Thank you for the comment, Laura. And Keegan also, like I said, we're tracking comments in the chat. And that was our last slide 109, 314, 55, 109, Section 4, referencing the tables in 102. That's the end of the rulemaking changes in our draft rules. And just to finish up, if anybody else has any other comments, today's recording and slides will be posted on our webpage later this week. We do have another stakeholder session coming this Thursday, 1 to 3. That is the correct time. I did not mess up that time, but that is the correct time. And unless we have any other comments, thanks so much for being here and providing your insight. And again, if you have follow-up questions or additional comments, there's our rules inbox at rules@lcb.wa.gov. And I see, we have Jay and Nick, and Nick is number 1. Tierney, would you
I got
mind
it.
unmuting?
Thank you very much, Denise. This was short and sweet, and I think pretty productive. I would like to submit some comments in writing. You could help me with that. Is it possible that I can get a copy of this draft in a Word doc form instead of a PDF?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I don't see why we couldn't, unless Daniel's going to come in and tell me no, but I don't see why not. Then
Okay.
You can just put comments right in the document. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, that's right. Rather than trying to go through the exercise of converting it to a doc on my end, very tedious.
Yes. Thank you. I think that sounds doable. And then Tierney, if you wouldn't mind unmuting Jay for us.
Jay, you should be good to go.
Okay, I'm just back to beat the horse again, because I don't think it's dead yet. But I just want to say, like, just what, I guess I'm pretty happy with most of what was done with this document. My biggest concern coming in was that 1025 and 103 weren't sort of obviously being removed. And so that kind of was one of my main concerns, like I said, before we started. And so then my concern kind of shifted to this 1035 section. And I just want to, there's once again these comments about, do you want to lab dangerous? Licenses are a privilege, blah, blah, blah. In 314-55-5055, which talks about like what licensees, so the producer processors and retailers have, if they receive a violation notice, they have 20 days, right, that before something happens, right? So they're granted that privilege of that as well. And I also want to state that, as far as the way I read the WAC, this section, it doesn't appear to me that violation notices are actually applied to certified labs, because the violations only, AVNs only or the only reference for AVNs in the WAC is for licensees, which we've been clearly told we are not. So anyway, that's just my comments. And like I said, I really would like to see an appeals process prior to actually suspending or revoking a lab certification. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Any other comments at this point? And if not, go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I would just add that if labs would like to be licensed by the LCB, legislative session is currently open, and I encourage you, if you'd like, you can certainly talk to your legislators and say that you would prefer, if you would like to be treated as licensees, like retailers, producers, and processors, you are more than welcome to contact your legislators and ask the LCB, ask them to propose legislation to have LCB licensed laboratories. But that was just the last thing, is why aren't labs treated like licensees? Because you aren't. And the only way to do that is for a legislative change.
Well, thanks everyone for participating this morning. I thought this was a very good discussion. I appreciate how detailed the comments were. And unless there's anything else, I think we're gonna call it good. And thanks again. And if you want to come on Thursday, it's Thursday 1 to 3. Thank you.